Welcome to Pairing Pages, an exclusive wine and literary event. I am Libby Zietsman-Brodie, and I'm very lucky to be joined today by Tilly Bagshawe, and we're going to be talking about The Secrets of Sainte Madeleine. I hope I have pronounced that correctly, Tilly.
Your French is at least as good as mine, so I'm sure you have.
Now, firstly, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
I've very much enjoyed reading this. I mean, a huge book, really, because it sweeps over an incredibly interesting period in history, a numerous amount of countries, 3 generations. What inspired you to write a book like this?
I mean, it is quite big. It did sort of, I think once you sort of get going with something like that, it can slightly sort of get away with you. So yes, the finished product was ended up being quite whopping. But I think, I mean, I've always loved family sagas, loved them. And the first book I ever wrote was a book called Adored, which was a big sort of multi-generational family. That was more of an American book. But since then, I haven't really done that. I've written a lot of thrillers, I've written romances, but I haven't really gone back to that. And it was 2 things really. One was that I recently reread Thornbirds, which you're probably too young to remember from the TV show, but there was a brilliant TV adaptation of it when I was growing up. And it was just a wonderful book. It's an Australian book, a huge multi-generational sort of saga, very romantic. And as I read that, I loved it, remembered how much I loved it, and just thought those kind of books really aren't being written anymore. And I felt, particularly in COVID, it was what I wanted to write. It was what I wanted to read, something very escapist, something very big, just where you could totally immerse yourself in, a different world. So that was really what sort of drew me to it, and to going back to trying to do a really big saga, and just sort of having the time, being at home with all my children and thinking, right, I want to do something else. I want to do something distracting. And then my agent, my lovely American agent, Luke, had long been suggesting, I think something in wine would be great. Like, what about a vineyard thing or a wine family? And I hadn't really had an idea for it until I had the idea for Sainte Madeleine. So it all came together.
I mean, this evening we've been pairing actually a couple of wines here by Louis Jadot. So I'll be trying those later on, because wine is such a theme of this book. You wouldn't be doing it justice to not enjoy it with a glass of wine.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's the whole point.
Yeah, I've already started on some beautiful Louis Jadot Saint Veron, which I'll come on to later on. But unfortunately, you're a bit earlier, aren't you?
Yes, it's only 9:30 in the morning here in California, so I'm giving it a miss for now, but I'm with you in spirit, very much with you in spirit.
We'll raise a glass to it later. So your agent was very keen for you to write about wine. Is this a passion of yours or an interest of yours before this novel?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a passion of mine necessarily. I mean, I love vineyards, and I've spent a lot of time in Napa. Oddly, not so much in Burgundy, where this book is settled. I've been to lots of vineyards in France, but more in sort of different parts of France. I certainly can't claim to be an expert in wine. My dad, growing up, was very interested in it, and has always, sort of been a collector, and so we did always, we were able to try lovely wines, and it's sort of been something around me as I grew up. But I'm definitely cannot claim to. I mean, I drink it, but other than that, no, I'm not a wine buff or specialist. But I do think, particularly in France, but some of these sort of lovely older properties, and there's just something especially idyllic, I think, about vineyards that I am drawn to, and I do love.
I mean, you describe it so beautifully, Sainte Madeleine, in the book. It's absolutely gorgeous as a place. I was wondering if it was actually based on anywhere you'd been, or if it's completely from your own imaginations, because the descriptions in the book are so gorgeous.
Thank you. I mean, it's funny, it feels so real to me now because I've lived in that book, for the last 2 years, and it's not one place, I'll say that. I mean, I think it's an amalgam of different lovely places. There's near where I grew up in Sussex, in Kent, there's a place called Bayham Abbey that's a ruined, just a ruined abbey. And there's also one near where we spend time in the Cotswolds that is at Sudeley Castle. That's just, I love that beautiful idea of the sort of arched windows, and it's all a little bit overgrown and crumbling. So it was sort of an amalgam of that, and then places that I do know from France, particularly from Alsace, where I spent more time when I was growing up. So yes, it's not one place. I think these things always have to come from your imagination a little bit, but it's definitely based on lots of different places that I've loved and sort of dream about stuck here in LA.
And that sort of comes across very much in the book, because it is almost a character in its own self, and a number of the characters in the book are in love with this place. It's almost the biggest love story there is.
Yes, and I think that really can resonate with spending so much of my life in America, which is a big part of my life, but England is home, and so I really understand what it means to be homesick and to miss a beautiful place where you grew up, the same way that you would miss a person, to love it the same way that you would love a person. I think particularly as you get older, those sort of roots, that sense of roots, is very important in the book, and it was very important to me, especially in COVID, writing this when I was stuck and I couldn't get to a lot of my family. You really realize, you just take for granted that you can be somewhere if you want to, and something like a pandemic or war, in the case of this book, all of a sudden, for all these years, Elise just can't get there. It's there, and she can't be there, and that's a feeling that I'm sort of resonates with me.
I completely understand that, and as you've referenced war, I mean, there's a number of wars that are
Yeah,
covered.
gory. Yeah,
Not worry. There's lots of war, and it's such an interesting time in history, because so much changes. I mean, obviously for all the characters, but for all of their countries, for all of their societies, for politics as a whole, it's quite a large thing to take on, to try and write that in a book, because you've obviously got everything going on in Spain, as well as sort of the World War. And
yeah.
so what inspired you? And the characters in it, I mean, they're in Morocco, they're in Spain, they go to Greece, England, all over. What inspired you to write about, why did you choose such a turbulent time in history to place this novel?
That's a good question, really. I mean, obviously, it's a really interesting time in history, and a lot happens. And I think, for all my books, but especially this one, it's really character driven. So I'm interested in the characters. I'm interested in Laurent and Elise, and what they would do under a certain set of circumstances. But obviously, at that time, all people were put into these crazy circumstances that they had never expected. And I think that's when you really do see the marks of people's character, both good and bad, how they react under that pressure, how that affects marriages, how that affects relationships, people's regrets. I think, there was a whole generation who, yes, sort of hard to put into words, but we all do things that are mistakes, but we normally just have time to rectify those mistakes. And I think something like war and separation, a lot of people's errors got set in stone, and in ways that had terrible sort of ongoing effects, for generations down the line, or certainly for the rest of their lives. So there are sort of things, I think that also makes Sainte Madeleine the place, it becomes this one steady sort of rock when everything else is moving and everything else is unstable and everything else is under threat. It's this lovely idea of a constant, even if it's a little bit of a fantasy, but it's this constant that are all sort of pulled back to. So it just gives you a lot of scope as a writer, with all this going on, to sort of think, well, how would my character do, very lonely, or how would they do, faced with death, or whatever it is. It makes it, in some ways, it makes it easier. There's just a lot of detail to work through, so make sure you're in the right year and your boat can go from A to B, and so there's a lot of research.
Yes, I was going to say, I imagine actually writing something like this would require quite a lot of research in all sorts of ways. And there is for me, I found a heartbreak. I won't give away any of the plot lines per se, but there is a heartbreaking moment where sort of the Chinese whispers of war and the repercussions of that for so many people involved. And I mean, that's obviously something very heartbreaking. There are many very sad moments in this book that you deal with.
Yes,
that
but
very
that's
important.
heartbreaking, I think, because it's so unnecessary. It's such a waste, it's just a stupid mistake that happens that then has ongoing impacts on characters' lives. And actually that makes me, it is quite nice to write a book in an era where there isn't internet and phones and connections, where if you want to know what's happening to somebody, you simply can't. You wait for a letter that may or may not come. It can be years until you hear anything. And I think it's very hard for us now to even imagine what that's like, that sort of distance, that sort of not knowing being part of your life always, that anxiety. And it gives you a lot more scope as a writer to let things happen that today wouldn't happen, because you'd know, you'd find a way to know.
Yeah, that's actually a really excellent point that I hadn't considered when I was reading this, but you're completely correct. It's reliant on letters, and letters actually getting to places. And obviously in a time of war and upheaval, that's even less likely. And you mentioned obviously being homesick yourself during the pandemic, or not being able to get back as you might otherwise do. How long ago did you move to America?
Oh, too long ago. I've lived here now on this sort of stretch. I've lived here for 10 years. But before that, I lived here. I mean, I moved here for the first time sort of 25 years ago, and we split time between both countries. But when we came here, I was expecting to go home after sort of 3 to 4 years, and it just, for various different reasons, got extended and extended, and that has been hard for me. I mean, it's lovely here. I love it here. It's not that I don't like California, and California ends up as well. But yeah, it's been too long, and it's hard, when your heart is in two places. And I'm very lucky to live here. I'm very lucky with the home that I have there. But yes, I miss it. I miss the people. I miss my family a lot.
Yeah. Well, family is a massive theme throughout your book, because obviously you go through 3 generations, and we hear a lot about everyone's relations to each other. And there is this wonderful sort of that people break apart and then come back together, and the next generation goes somewhere, and then their children come back. And the family seems to be a really big theme in your writing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, and I think, family, this is a family saga, and this was about sort of one family and its history, but obviously that, over time expands and leads you into other characters and families. I do think, that's really the heart of things for a novelist, is certainly relationships, but probably family. Every family is different. Every family has those unique, pressures. And I do think, again, but I just always come back to it. But writing this during COVID, when you're all suddenly at home, I literally wrote this book in a sort of corridor under a coat rack, with sort of fingerless gloves on, because all the bedrooms and rooms everywhere upstairs was taken by my children's Zoom schooling, and then my husband was at home working, and there was no other space, and I just had a little tiny table wedged under the door, with all these coats, and it was really cold and drafty, but you just, that sort of brought our family together in a way that we hadn't anticipated, and you learn a lot of things about yourselves and your relationships with each other. So it was the perfect time to do it.
And that's probably why, it's probably the time you most want to be escaping somewhere and thinking about all these different journeys and travels and things you could be doing. Take me to that yacht in Greece.
Me away from this coat. Yes, 100%, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. Now, there's 2 main wine regions that we sort of visit in the book. And obviously right now you are very close to Napa. I'll speak about Burgundy, Bourgogne when we try these wines in a bit, but I'd love to hear about what Napa means to you, because obviously you live I'd love to hear what both these regions mean to you. Obviously.
Well, with Napa, I love Napa. It's absolutely beautiful. It's quite a few years since I last went there, but I have magical memories of lovely trips to Napa. And there's a very beautiful hotel there called Auberge de Soleil, which is with all the sort of vineyards running down, and it's absolutely lovely, in a different way to France, because obviously the buildings and the villages, the towns around, although they're quite old by American standards, it doesn't have that sort of lovely European sort of crumble. There's no church bells and whatnot, but the actual vineyards themselves are amazing. And then all the sort of scenery around, the redwoods, the forests, you know, the places where my characters in Napa grew up, are just stunningly beautiful. And I think, you know, sometimes I struggle here living in Los Angeles, but I love California. As soon as you leave the city, I think just sort of for natural beauty, you can't beat it. It's really stunning. So there's Napa in the north, and then between Napa and Los Angeles, there's another wine region called Santa Ynez, which is sort of near Santa Barbara, where I probably have spent more time and been to more vineyards, and done sort of tastings and whatnot. But yeah, I just, you know, I love these areas. They really are. I mean, California is a whole world. It's beautiful beyond belief.
Well, it sounds really wonderful, and you definitely have that push-pull of the new world, old world dynamics going on with the characters as well. It really suits the couple. I don't know how much, I don't want to give away too much, but the couple that sort of make a vineyard there and create that's totally worlds away from the old world that you also explore in the book.
Yeah, so, and I think, and then Ruth, the character from who marries one of the characters, and she ends up going to France for a period and living at Sainte Madeleine, you know, to sort of see that and appreciate the beauty of it. But, you know, those worlds are so different, and the way she would have been brought up versus her husband's family, it sort of comes back to that thing of families and how, you know, how very different, you know, even though they both had this love of wine and they both grew up in that culture, which is what brought them together. They're very, very different, and the sort of push and pull between America, the new world, and the old world that's, you know, obviously something that has meaning in my life too.
Yes, of course. With your old world background and then moving to America, it must have really pulled your own personal experiences.
Sure.
So I'm going to just try the first. I say try. I've obviously already started drinking. But the first wine here is Louis Jadot here by it's from Saint-Ferrand, which is from the Macon region in Burgundy, Bourgogne. And it's both the wines we're having this evening, or I'm having this evening, are 2019. And that vintage was quite a hot, dry year. And as you know, sort of vintage really affects the flavors of that wine. And so it was a bit of a drought year. And people are saying it's one of the best years in the region actually recently, because that really concentrated the flavors. I know that in the book here they make a lot of white Pinot, so you've got the Pinot Blanc and stuff there, but nowadays, of course, it's more often the white wines are made from Chardonnay. Now Chardonnay can be quite controversial. Great people think they don't like Chardonnay. I'm obviously very against that as a thought process, because it's the grape of Champagne, Blanc de Blanc, obviously white Burgundy, which is exceptional, and it really is one of these grapes that picks up terroir like nothing else. It's such a versatile grape. So this one here, you've got this lovely, it's got a lot of that concentration of the flavors from that hot, dry year, but it's also got this amazing freshness running through it. And I'm actually salivating. Oh, sorry. But they've used stainless steel to really retain those fresh fruit flavors, and you've got white peach, you've got a hint of nuttiness in there, you've got the lemon, the ripeness going on. But I
really wish I was on your side of the screen right now. That looks great.
Absolutely delicious. And I'm not sure if I'm just going to say that I think this wine is around £23 from Tesco for people in the UK, which is it's such good value for this region, because, as you know, sort of I was in Bourgogne recently for a press trip, and it's somewhere that the world looks up to for its winemaking, because it's that old world traditional beautiful styles, and the terroir is so incredible, and this is a really exceptional wine. It would go wonderfully with sort of a Sunday chicken roast, your roast chicken, I'm not sure if you do have the roast. Do you have the Sunday roast in LA?
Well, I do. yeah, no, not generally, but
well, this would be a perfect wine for that. So yeah, it's absolutely really gorgeous. And on that note, as you're not drinking, and I feel I feel bad that
No,
we'll
no, please.
this class later.
Mm.
So you've obviously been in wine regions in France. You're saying not so much Burgundy or Bourgogne. So why did you choose to base the novel, like the heart of the novel, really, in Bourgogne?
I think, partly because it is so iconic for wine, and I wanted this to be an iconic family and vineyard, and then I also wanted it to have that sort of religious, because Sainte Madeleine, this vineyard, it used to be an abbey, and there's a sort of legend that goes with it. There's a slightly fairy tale element of the old legend and everything else. So I did a little bit of research more just into that, and the cathedral in Vézelay, and also areas where the Catholic Church, was or wasn't active during the resistance, and things like that. So it was trying to bring together, a very beautiful region and an iconic wine region, but one that also had those other sort of historical elements that I felt would work with, these characters and what I was trying to do. So that's really why. And then I think also, of course, there are elements of places you've been and people that come into it, but it's a novel. It does come from your imagination, and so it allowed me a little bit to be a little bit freer with some of the places and the scenes and the settings. I could make it from from my heart and my imagination. It's sort of it's a fantasy Burgundy of my imagining rather than necessarily 100% the real one.
Well, it's really beautifully written. That sort of the sweeping vistas you get. It's so evocative of actually being there, and being in any vineyard. I do think it's quite lucky if you are in wine, because you don't really find vineyards anywhere ugly. Like every wine growing region seems to be really beautiful, be it, as you say, Napa or France or Italy or South Africa or wherever it is. There are some really, really gorgeous areas, and I can see why they make such beautiful settings for particularly romantic novels, which, although there's a lot of heartbreak in this, it is a very romantic book.
Oh, good. I hope so. I want it to be romantic in all the sense, romantic emotionally, and romantic just in the sense of, yes, the house and the setting and the whole thing, because it is very romantic, all the suffering and what people went through at that time, and how they found one another again, or they tried to. It's amazing what one generation packed into a lifetime, really.
Absolutely, and it pulls at the heartstrings as you watch these people grow up from how old's Elise when you first meet her? Is she 4?
I feel like she might be slightly older than 4, but I can't honestly remember. She might be like 7 or 8 or something. Yeah, she's little. She's little.
She's little, and then you see her going all the way up and then having children of her own, and losing parents, and it's definitely a novel, a book that really affects you emotionally, I would say.
Oh, well, good. I hope so. Thank you, because I hope so. It affected me. I mean, these people are so real to me. It's a bit weird, but I spent, as I say, the last 2 years with them, so it all feels like a real place in my mind.
And how is that process? I've never written a book, so I have no idea. So when you're forming these characters and you're sort of deciding their fate, do you ever feel, do you have those pangs of guilt that you're putting them through this, or is it just part of it?
Definitely. And I mean, you have a plan, you know roughly where you want the story to be going, but I try to be quite loose with that. And definitely some characters sort of in the writing rise up to become more important than you thought they were going to be, and vice versa. And so you do feel guilty, and you do feel sort of torn and attached. You finish writing for the day and you go and do your thing, but they're with you. Not always, I have to say. I mean, I've written a lot of books, and some you become more attached to than others, but for me it's really the ones like this that's all about the characters, where you do become, I think people remember the characters from books long after they've forgotten the plot and what happened, and at least I do. Is the characters that really sort of stay with you. So yeah, you do sometimes feel a bit mean putting them through it.
And do you pull in, I mean, are any of these characters sort of based on parts of personalities that you've met along the way? Are they purely invention, or are they sort of, as you write them, do they become similar to people you know?
They do a bit, I think. I think they definitely do. I think particularly my grandmother, on my dad's side, and her family, um, who were of that era, and they, it's sort of an amalgam of them, her and some of her sisters. But both of my, so I have alcoholism on both sides of my family. My father's mother was very chronically alcoholic, and my mother's father was. So although I don't have it in my sort of immediate family, both my parents were children of alcoholics, and it was, and my family love wine, and so those two things aren't necessarily connected. But I think there was always a sort of caution, even though my father was very interested in wine, there was always a caution about addiction and this idea of genetic addiction, which I fully believe in, of that sort of being passed down through families. So I think definitely some of Louis, the father's bad behavior in the beginning of the book, and how Elise struggles with her drinking. I think that is based. It's not that she is a specific member of my family, but for sure I've drawn on that a good bit.
Those struggles. Well, I think that's very timely, because right now, I mean, everyone is very focused on mindful drinking, consumption and things like that. So in a way that perhaps when this novel was set, it wasn't such a thing. But now, you can enjoy a really beautiful glass of wine, and we now know the benefits and other things that go along with that. And people, I think, are a lot more aware of all of that.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I don't believe, I think the reason that the characters in this book, some of them struggle with alcoholism, nothing to do with them living on a vineyard. I'm a firm person of the camp that, you drink because you're an alcoholic. That's what, there doesn't have to be another reason for it. It's just there. And certainly these characters, particularly Elise, had enough stress that she might look to something as a relief of stress, but so did all the other characters have stress, and it was only happened to her. So I try to, in my mind, this is something that's very much a gene. And so it's about both the beautiful things that got passed down through this family, this amazing property and these wonderful wines, but also that sort of darker side, and how we all love our children. We want them to be like us to a certain degree, but we hope they don't inherit the worst of us, but sometimes they do. And so it's more about that, I think, than anything
and sort
else.
of how you deal and overcome with that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And passing down, obviously, magic is passed down with these butterflies. Is that based is this purely something you've invented, or is this based, the butterflies, the magic butterflies, this based in fact?
Well, the butterflies specifically is something that I invented, I came up with, but this idea of magic, and the magic that you feel in childhood to a home that you love, I believe in that. I really believe in that, and I think that's true. And I think for some people who are lucky enough to hold on to that magic as they grow through adulthood, are really blessed. And magic doesn't have to end with adulthood, but for a lot of people it does. And then particularly in the era they lived, all this horror of war, it's like all the magic suddenly stopped together. But I feel almost because of that, people are reaching for it. They're reaching for those happy memories. They're reaching for, what is that magical thing that makes something special, similar to, what is it that makes one wine, one vineyard here and the next just down the road, it can make all the difference in the world. There's a sort of alchemy to it. There is a level of magic to it, to that whole process. So I think I like the way that all sort of weaves in together. But the butterflies specifically, no, I don't know, just thought that was a nice idea.
No, it's really beautiful. I mean, the book starts with this sort of like fable and story of the butterflies, and the fact that they keep popping up throughout, sort of guiding characters in certain ways, I think is really beautifully and interestingly done.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's whimsical, but as you say, it's a romantic book, and why not?
Absolutely, and indeed, and I was wondering what is next. Is there more for this book? Do you know, or what's next for the book? Or
we'll see. I mean, I'd love to think there's more for the book, particularly as you know, I was so inspired when I was writing it, you know, reading Thornbirds again. I would love to see it adapted. I'd love to see it on screen one day. That would be amazing. In terms of my next book, I am writing something which has some similarities, also set in France, and a big family sort of saga. So it's similar in style, but it's not these characters. I thought about it, but I feel like, at least for now, I like where these characters have come to at the end of this book. I mean, there's certainly another book in this for what would happen to the next generation with that vineyard. But until I have a clear idea of what I want that to be, I'm going to do something else, something a little different next time.
Oh, I'm going to be waiting with bated breath then, because I want to know what happens to that next generation.
They all live happily ever after.
I mean, I'm kind of hoping that, but I'm somehow doubtful. But I do love that resolution, really, of the way the generations weave back together over this vineyard. And I think that I can see that as a complete ending, but at the same time, because we've gone through these different generations, it would be wonderful to hear.
Well, also it ended in the 1970s, which is, you know, then a lot was about to happen in wine, as I now know. You know, it was a very interesting time. If you were to be the co-owners of a property like this at that time, this change in interesting times. So we'll see.
I think we just lost you on that last bit. Sorry, you said it would be a very interesting time if you to be co-owners.
Co-owners of a vineyard, of a property like that. I just think in the wine business, in your business, that was coming into another era of really interesting, just change, huge changes. So yes, all sorts of, there's a lot of ways you could play that, but we'll see. For now, it's been a very intense 2 years with these guys, so I'm gonna.
Yes. I can imagine so. And may I ask, I mean, I'm not sure if you can choose, but do you have any favorite characters? I have my favorites. So
I really like Louis as a character, even though he's a horrible person often. What I like about him is I feel that you can, if only it weren't for his problems with drinking, like that, there is a good person underneath. There's certainly a charming person. Throughout with him, I feel like if he'd just taken a different step, things could have been different. And so I have a lot of compassion for him, for the sort of disappointments in his life, even though they're all of his own making. Well, perhaps because they're all of his own making, actually. He doesn't have the strength that his daughter and his wife and other people in his family eventually have and show. So I like him. He's an interesting character, even though sometimes he's quite villainous. And I do like Elise. I know from readers of this book that she's quite infuriating, and people want to scream at her sometimes, and so do I. She also makes terrible choices at certain points, but she has one real love and belief, which is for this house, this home, and she wants to get back there, and she does. And for that alone, I admire her, because it's difficult to do.
Yeah. A lot of this book seems to be, with no pun intended over the legend, but it's about the butterfly effect, in that people make one decision,
Yes.
one seemingly small thing happens, and it sets off this whole series of events and experiences and emotions. And people, you've drawn very human characters. They're not perfect, many of them are flawed. And what happens to them in that moment, how they react to things, how they react to each other. You might be, as the reader, going, stop doing that. But actually, it's a far more human experience.
Yeah.
These people to not be perfect, be making these choices driven by whatever drives them at that moment.
Exactly. And I hope that's what readers, certainly as a writer, that's what you sort of empathize with, because we are not perfect, and we do really make stupid decisions, and sometimes it's not stupid, sometimes it's not on us, it's something that's happened. But I think also you see characters in this book like Laurent, who are much more, they are much better people, if you like. They're very good moral people, and they have a certain idea about how the world should go, and then events happen in the world, the wars, the things that he's had to see and go through, and you just realize, no, you can set your plan, but it's not going to go that way. It's going to go a completely other way, and you're going to have to find a way to live with that. And I think all the characters in this book, in their different ways, you know, they survive. They find other loves that they weren't expecting, and they survive. But I love Elise because, as I say, she has this one goal, and through all of it, that remains the same.
Absolutely. No, she's really wonderful. I will now go on to the second glass of wine I'll be having this evening. So this is another one by Louis Jadot, of course. This is a Bourgogne, obviously Côte d'Or, and it's a Pinot Noir. Now I know from the book they have beautiful Pinot Noir vines that they talk about, but yeah. So Pinot Noir, I believe, is a gift of a grape to any wine drinker or any foodie. It's known as the heartbreak grape as well because it's incredibly difficult to grow. It's a real issue because it's so temperamental and it can be so tricky. But what's wonderful about it is that it's got these really silky tannins, which makes it, and it's quite a light red in that way, that although it's got tons of flavor, it's got, you know, beautiful. For me, Pinot Noirs always slightly smell like roses drying in a cedar wood box, but it's got that sort of like cedar and floral elements. And that's how it sort of, that's my own go-to. But because it's got such sort of silky smooth tannins generally, it's also a red that pairs very well if someone's normally a white wine drinker and they're having fish, for example. You could have a fish dish with a Pinot Noir, though I would say if we're going down the Sunday roast analogy, then probably like a rack of lamb would be amazing. And of course, I believe that what grows together goes together quite well. So you could do this with like a, you know, like a duck, you know, sort of duck breast as they have in France, beautifully done. But this is absolutely gorgeous. I think this is a medium bodied. It's got loads of plump fruit. It's got that concentration from that drought year, but it's got this beautiful, smooth, silky tan as well. And still, again, it's quite bright because it's quite youthful and young. And it's been, I think it's been aged in oak for about 8 to 10 months, partially in oak, partially in stainless steel. And it just gives it that beautiful edge to it. But it's a really gorgeous wine, this. So I highly recommend it. Now I think this one is priced at £26.90. There's the beautiful label as well. From Taurus Wines, Solent Cellar, Jaded Palates, Hanford Wines, Surrey Wine Cellars. I mean, it's all over the place. So this is the second wine we're having this evening. Are you normally a red or a white drinker? Yeah.
Red. I used to be exclusively, and then I gave that up. I went to a vineyard called Dow here, that's in the sort of mid California, and they had the Chardonnay. It was so delicious. I hadn't drunk white wine ever, and I went for a tasting there with my in-laws. And so after that, now thanks to Dow Vineyards, which I can give a little plug, they were amazing. I do like whites from time to time, but I'm more of a red drinker. These guys had to make reds.
Yeah, no, perfect. I mean, they make everything as far as they see, but I love the idea of the modern marketing that Ruth comes up with, the ink line.
Yes, yeah.
Because that's such a big thing as well when you're sort of looking at bottles on shelves between the old world style labels and the new world style labels. You'll often see a big difference in imagery and wording, and then she brings that over to the old world, to France, and it's a big hit. That was, I thought, very
I mean, I don't know how realistic that honestly would be in that time, because obviously there was a huge you know, California wines were not then what they are now, but yes, I like that she brings that sort of youthful energy and those new modern ideas, and particularly as a woman, so she's quite good. That I think she's quite a feminist character. In the women in the book, the French women are strong, but they're strong within the confines of their really quite rigid social world that they grew up in, and it's all about who they're going to marry, and that's that. So I think Ruth, she brings a bit more oomph to the table.
I mean, she's definitely one of my favorites, and I love the fact that sort of romance blossoms over a belch, which is which definitely amused me.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, good. Yeah, no, I like her too. She's really different, and sometimes with a book like this, especially being set in this time, it can get a bit heavy. So every now and then it's nice to be somewhere else and lighten it up.
No, definitely. Well, I think these are, I mean, will you be having a glass this evening?
I will be having a glass this evening, as
or a
most
mimosa.
evenings. But yeah, no, I will. I definitely will. And thank you so much for this. It's really been fun.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, so actually, how long has this book been out now? Because it's relatively new.
It's just out. Yeah, it's
Just
a week.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really wonderful. I really hope that lots of people are going to go and grab this, because it's sweeping, and I look forward to hearing about the next generation.
All right, I'll get to work on it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was a real, I'm now cheersing myself with these two.
Yeah, sorry, my coffee. Next time, we'll be in the same time zone.
Well, lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining me on Pairing Pages. This is an exclusive wine literary event, and it's very exciting, so thank you.